I guarantee you could find successful people.
Do the same thing in Appalachia. Do the same thing in rural Alabama.
Correct. 100%.
I mean, no, but for real, like, why are you... Listen,
the point I'm trying to make is...
there are people of different socioeconomic statuses in this country.
And we should vet them based on their ability to have success.
Yes, absolutely.
They should be vetted.
But I don't understand why are you suggesting... But just, okay, Noah just made the point. We don't do collective guilt here in this country. The individuals...
Correct. That's why they should be vetted.
The individuals ought to have an opportunity to prove themselves.
In today's video, we're watching Abby Phillip and Anna Navarro go head-to-head with Noah Rothman and Joe Borelli in one of the sharpest immigration debates we've seen on CNN in a long time. We have heard it in every era, against Germans, against the Irish, against Italians, against Jews, against Chinese immigrants, against Central Americans, and now against East Africans. And every single time, the predictions of cultural collapse and economic doom have been wrong. So let's dive in and watch how Abby Phillip and Anna Navarro shut down these MAGA pundits on Newsnight with Abby Phillip.
Now, we know Stephen Miller doesn't like immigration much, but it is interesting that now all of a sudden, all of the woes of America are to be blamed on someone else other than us.
You know, I find it stunning in so many ways. I've always found the economic arguments against immigration baffling, because here are the facts. The fact that U.S. GDP is about a percentage point higher than Europe's on trend in any given year is down largely to immigration. The fact that we had the strongest post-COVID recovery is down in part to the fact that under Joe Biden, immigration was keeping the economy afloat. I'm going to come clean. I am the daughter of an immigrant, a Muslim immigrant actually, that was educated in this country, started a business in rural Indiana. I grew up in Trump country, you know. I know red states. I know a lot of people in my county, my high school that voted for him. But this kind of hate mongering is just wrong, and it's not who we are as Americans. And also, I'd like to break down those test scores, because I look around me in New York City, and I think it's the immigrants that are hiking the test scores up here.
There are studies about this. I'm sure Stephen Miller doesn't care, but studies that show that test scores are not negatively impacted by immigration. According to Brookings, no adverse effects of immigrant students on the academic achievement of U.S.-born students. But also Stephen Miller himself, he comes from an immigrant background.
Yeah.
In 2018, his uncle wrote this op-ed saying, Stephen Miller is an immigration hypocrite. I know because I'm his uncle. If my nephew's ideas on immigration had been in force a century ago, our family would have been wiped out. He is an American because of immigration, because of chain migration. His family came from what I guess Trump would now call a shithole country or a shithole part of the world, war-torn, fleeing persecution, and now he is slamming the door behind him.
All of us, with the exception of Native Americans and slaves who were brought here against their will, are immigrants. So when he says, if you take immigration, because he's like in the middle of the White House lawn having an interview with Will Cain and screaming, right? So if you take out immigration from test scores, so where do we start to take off immigration? Should we do it before or after the Mayflower? Should we do it when brown people started coming here, or when it was Italians and Irish coming here?
Well, that's what he was trying to say in that interview. The whole interview was a wild ride. He was essentially saying that the 1965 repeal of the 1924 Immigration Act was a mistake, which was essentially saying the immigration could only come from Northern European countries in 1924. He's saying that was wrong. But what prompted the conversation is what happened in Minnesota with the Somali groups who were defrauding COVID funds, about $1 billion out of the 250 some odd billion that were defrauded when the COVID spigots were open. He goes into collective guilt. That's wrong. The notion here that individuals who are named in charging documents, we can generalize a broad ethnic class, that's wrong. However, there is an adjacent conversation.
What makes the panic especially ironic is that the US is experiencing a labor shortage in absolutely critical industries: nursing, agriculture, construction, elder care, and immigrants are disproportionately filling those gaps. Hospital systems in the Midwest literally warned that without immigrant nurses, ICUs cannot staff properly. If the loudest critics got what they claimed to want, their own communities would feel the cuts first. And historically, none of this fear is new. Every wave of immigrants, Irish, Italians, Eastern Europeans, Chinese, Mexicans, Somalis, has been blamed for crime, corruption, poverty, disease, you name it. What we never talk about is how quickly those narratives collapse once the newcomers become part of the American fabric. Italians went from being smeared as criminals in the early 1900s to becoming mayors, firefighters, judges, and governors a generation later. The cycle repeats every time, which is why the collective guilt approach is not only offensive, it's factually ridiculous. Fraud doesn't become less wrong because a white-collar criminal is white, and it doesn't become more wrong because the criminal is Somali. Crime is crime, but the leap from a crime happened to an entire community is a threat is exactly how you end up repeating the darkest chapters of American nativism. So the real question isn't whether America benefits from immigration. It does overwhelmingly. The real question is whether we're going to keep letting the loudest commentators reduce 45 million immigrants to lazy stereotypes every time a sensational headline lands. Because the data, the history, and frankly, basic fairness all point in the opposite direction.
Around assimilation and the encouragement of it, which Stephen Miller, is a terrible ambassador for. I will concede that. Nevertheless, in American cities where there is a multicultural social compact, which doesn't necessarily regard assimilation into the American society as being a good thing. Maybe you should preserve your individual ethnic characteristics.
Can I just ask, what do you mean by assimilation?
I mean,
in this context, what do you mean by assimilation?
Acculturation,
right, but what does that have to do with
ensuring that your children can navigate schools?
But hold on, I'm curious. In the context of Somalis in Minnesota, what do you mean? What is the relationship between assimilation or
and not just Somalis, anywhere, any ethnic enclave. Yeah. We've had ethnic enclaves in this country throughout its history. So outside the ethnic enclave, it's very difficult to navigate if you don't know English, if you don't know the culture, if you don't understand how to navigate society.
Let me talk to you about difficult, though. These are the kind of people who are willing to work really hard. I am from Arizona, where I was born and raised and ran for Congress this last year. Yeah. And the district I ran in represents hundreds of miles of the U.S.-Mexico border. And I went down to Yuma, and I sat with students who queue up on the other side of the border for 3 to 4 hours. I mean, these kids wake up at 2 in the morning to get to high school on time. And those are the kind of people we need in this country.
They are. And what I'm saying is that
they know difficult things.
That's from a first-generation American who knows how to do hard things. Into our country, as I do, should have enough confidence in the American system to say, yes, you should integrate into
I
want
to make
the
point
here. I culture and be a productive member of society.
I guess the part I don't understand is why are you assuming that assimilation is not happening?
Yeah.
Because, when Stephen Miller's ancestors came here in the early 1900s, they didn't speak a lick of English, okay? They were working factory jobs. There is a generational shift that happens where sometimes the first generation, they don't speak English, but they have children, and those people are Americans, and they become people who are no different from you or you or you or you. And so why are we assuming that assimilation is not happening? All the evidence suggests that assimilation actually is happening and does happen.
What gets lost in these debates about assimilation is that America already has one of the strongest assimilation rates in the world, and that's not an opinion. It's the conclusion of study after study. The National Academy of Sciences has tracked immigrant integration for over a century, and the pattern is consistent. The first generation works hard to get by, the second generation becomes bilingual and fully integrated into schools and the workforce, and by the third generation, most linguistic and cultural markers have already disappeared. This isn't speculation, it's the measured trajectory of every major immigrant group that has ever come to this country. And if you want a real-world example, Minnesota is actually a perfect one. Somali Americans there have some of the highest entrepreneurship rates in the entire state, literally one of the fastest growing groups of small business owners. That economic contribution alone is a form of assimilation. You don't open restaurants, trucking companies, home care services, or retail shops unless you're fully participating in the local economy and interacting with the broader community every single day. Plus, the language argument doesn't hold up under scrutiny. According to the latest census data, over 90% of US-born children of immigrants speak English very well, often becoming the language brokers for their own parents. That's the definition of successful assimilation. The idea that enclaves somehow freeze people in place just isn't supported by the evidence. Ethnic neighborhoods have always existed as transitional spaces. Little Italy, Chinatown, Greek town, Little Havana. These weren't signs of failure. They were launch pads.
I think schools are a bad indicator because I think, you know, children should not be blamed for anything. And I think singling them out as some indicator of an economic or immigration group, rather, success is probably a bad thing. But in this rush to defend the Somali settlement, right, in the past couple of weeks, in the rush to defend sort of the Somalis in the wake of the scandal about the fraud, right, there were some people out there saying the Somalis contribute $67 million in taxes to the state of Minnesota, right? And you look at that in the big context, that basically averages actually averages out to about $1,000 in state and local taxes, which is an eighth of what Minnesotans pay. Minnesotans pay about $8,000 per person in taxes. Then you look at the social programs, right? 47% of the Somali people here in Minnesota were on some type of social welfare program. How can we point to that community at large? And I admit, I guarantee you can find successful people.
Do the same thing in Appalachia. Do the same thing in rural Alabama.
100%.
I mean, no, but for real, like, why are you... Listen,
the point I'm trying to make is...
there are people of different socioeconomic statuses in this country.
And we should vet them based on their ability to have success.
Yes, absolutely.
They should be vetted.
But I don't understand why are you suggesting... But just, okay, Noah just made the point. We don't do collective guilt here in this country. The individuals...
Correct. That's why they should be vetted.
The individuals ought to have an opportunity to prove themselves
when you give blanket TPS
worthy
or
of being
open
in
the
this
border,
country,
the southern border,
work,
you're not
to
vetting
advance
people. You're actually not evaluating people based on their ability to be successful. My point to you about Somalia is that there's probably a lot of Somalians, I know there are, that are doing very good things and being productive.
So then why are you
there's
making
a lot of them
why are you making a claim about the group as opposed to dealing with individuals?
We opened the border, the southern border during Joe Biden, and we allowed people to come in unvetted.
But do you know that Somalis, hold on a second. Do you know that the population of Minnesota Somalis are not necessarily people who have come here in the last 4 years? They're people who have been here who for decades and decades. It's not open borders from Joe Biden. But that's still not a successful indicator that 47% are on social welfare programs. Decades of policy that have allowed people to come in, fleeing war, fleeing all kinds of things, and to build lives for themselves. This is not a simple story of just Biden let them in.
Let's just
Here's
the real point.
What more story is there than on the southern border Joe Biden let them in?
Here's the real point that I'm trying to make. When we talk about groups and we say that they are or not allowed to pursue the American dream just based on where they come from, that seems pretty darn anti-American to me.
I completely agree.
Italians were told the same thing. Jews were told the same thing. And guess what?
They also tend to, I want to make one point. They also tend to be told this at times when there's economic hardship, when there are other things going on. In 1924, the economic situation, we were leading into what was going to be the crash of '29 and a Great Depression. There was a lot of tension, a lot of technological change, a lot of job market change. It's not an accident that we're hearing this kind of nativist rhetoric now when there are outside problems.
It's absolutely nativist rhetoric targeting brown and black.
100%.
He refers to it.
And 24, it was.
Speaking of needing workers, Minnesota has one of the tightest labor markets in the entire United States. Employers there regularly say that immigrant communities, including the Somali population, are literally keeping key industries alive. Poultry processing, manufacturing, long-haul trucking, healthcare assistance. If those workers disappeared tomorrow, the Minnesota economy would feel it immediately. This isn't speculation. It's been documented by the Minneapolis Fed, the University of Minnesota, and dozens of statewide economic analyses. Another point that Abby and Rana are hinting at but deserves to be said plainly. Somali refugees didn't just randomly show up because of a Biden border crisis. They were admitted over decades through legal refugee programs supported by both Republican and Democratic administrations. Many came in the 1990s and early 2000s during the Clinton, Bush, and Obama years because the United States helped resettle people displaced by civil war. To pretend this is a sudden wave connected to Biden's border policy is just rewriting history. And the historical pattern Rana raised is important too. Every immigrant group, Jews, Italians, Irish, Chinese, Japanese, Mexicans, has been painted as a threat during moments of economic anxiety. When the economy is shaky or technology is changing fast, you see the same talking points recycled. They're not assimilating, they're draining resources, they're changing our culture. And every time the panic looks ridiculous a generation later. What is actually anti-American is telling certain groups that the American dream is off limits to them because they arrived poor or fled a crisis. That's literally how most of our families got here. Pause. Are you getting tired of getting half the story from biased news sources? One outlet says one thing and another says the complete opposite. How are you supposed to know what's actually true? That's where ground news comes in. It lets you compare how different media outlets, left, right, and center are covering the same story. So you can see the full picture instead of just the echo chamber. And here's the best part. Click the link in the description and get 40% off the Vantage tier, which gives you even deeper insights into media bias and political trends. Stay informed, think for yourself, and check out Ground News in the description down below.